Thailand and Cambodia were at war for the first time in decades before a ceasefire agreement was struck over the weekend. Also, President Trump gives Russia less than 2 weeks to stop the war with Ukraine, or else they will pay with hefty tariffs. And speaking of tariffs, as Canada still looks to see what type of trade deal will be made with the U.S., the EU averts a trade war with the Americans, striking a 15% trade deal. So with more details on all of this, here is Lisa Daftari, editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk. Welcome back, Lisa.
Thank you so much for having me, Jeanette. I look forward to our conversation.
Great. Okay, so let's talk about that last one. So, Lisa, this 15% trade deal between the European Union and the United States, what does that look like? What does it include?
You know what's interesting? All eyes are on this deal because, like you said, Canada, more importantly for global stability, China, looking at this deal and saying, are we going to strike a similar type deal? Well, this is exactly what Donald Trump had in mind when he announced the tariffs, that he would say something so outrageous that he would sit down with his opposing partner and would work out a deal just like we saw with the Europeans. So the Europeans, we're talking about energy deals, we're talking about trade deals, we're talking about putting back in place not only what we had, but also really beefing up the relationship at the 15% level. It's going to be lucrative for the United States. It'll be lucrative for the EU. It brings in a lot more deals. And hopefully, like you said, we're looking at Canada, we're looking at China. Who's next? The Secretary of Treasury here in the United States has said that there have been behind the scenes talks with many, many nations who are lining up, as he said, to speak with Donald Trump, to make a deal. Hopefully, this is what we talked about, Jeanette. Week after week, we sit here and we say, how is this going to play out? And how will it look for the United States-Canada relationship that we both value very much? It looks like, Donald Trump and his administration are looking to make deals, and hopefully deals that will benefit both sides so that we can put this behind us and we can look at global trade in a much more robust way that will be, prosperous for all.
Yeah, no, exactly. And of course, speaking of Donald Trump, he has now given Russia less than 2 weeks to reach a peace deal with Ukraine or face massive secondary tariffs. So, Lisa, this is reduced now from the 50-day deadline that Trump originally gave Vladimir Putin, right?
Right. So he's basically is escalating or upping the ante, as they say. He gave 50 days. He saw no movement by Putin. And now Donald Trump is very disappointed, as he said in his own words, very disappointed that Putin is not moving the needle in order to move towards some sort of ceasefire or peace agreement, some sort of de-escalation in this war. So Donald Trump said, why should I give you 50 days? Now you have 2 weeks to get this wrapped up. He wants to see movement. He wants to see de-escalation. He wants to see Putin make some sort of effort or pay the consequences. What we saw in the initial months of the Ukraine invasion by Russia was multilateral sanctions. Everyone was on board. This is something that worked very quickly to say, these are going to be the economic punitive damages that you have to pay. These are going to be the consequences. And now this is going to be a secondary, meaning if you thought that was bad, wait till you see what we have in store. So Donald Trump putting a very, very quick timer on this one to hopefully see some action by Putin.
Yeah, no, we'll have to wait and see what happens. As I mentioned in the headline there, Thailand and Cambodia were at war for 5 days, but have agreed now to a ceasefire as of midnight this morning, Monday, July 28th. So, Lisa, this one went a little under the radar, but it was serious. 300,000 people were displaced. What can you tell us about this conflict?
So yes, we had about 40 casualties, 300,000 displaced. And as you said, the world is just waking up to the news and has to now pivot and say, there was a ceasefire, which thank goodness there was
right?
one.
Yes.
Right. We're very happy to always hear about ceasefires. This was, and thankfully, very short, but this is something that has sprouted up a few times over decades because it is a territorial dispute between the two. They're on the border. It happens often, but both sides did want to de-escalate. This is what happens in disputes like this, right? There are sometimes, escalations that happen, and both sides didn't intend for it to happen, but it does happen because, again, all eyes are on that piece of territory between the two countries. So, yes, we're waking up to a ceasefire. We hope that this one lasts, that it holds, that we don't hear about more casualties, and those who have been displaced can return home.
How did it get resolved?
This is, it's just Right, and I think that's a bigger part of the story moving forward in terms of global security. Both China and the United States were very heavily vested in this de-escalation very quickly. As you know, Donald Trump is traveling right now, meeting with multiple partners to talk about a variation of things, including the war between Russia and Ukraine, including what's happening between Israel and Hamas in Gaza and in Israel. And of course, this came on his radar and he quickly was able to put an end to it. So, of course, bragging points, flexing points for Donald Trump, who says, I didn't let another war happen. So, yes, we can try, hopefully check this one off the list.
Okay. Okay. Again, sort of related to Trump here. He's got his hands in
He's
everything.
the man of the hour, right?
So, French President Emmanuel Macron surprised several nations last week when he announced that France's intention to recognize a Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly in September. Now, President Trump is rejecting this move, saying that the U.S. is going to skip the summit. So, Lisa, please tell us more about this.
Donald Trump had a very funny slash authentic response to Macron unilaterally coming in saying, we want to recognize a Palestinian state in his Parisian way. And Donald Trump comes out and says, he's a nice guy, but we really don't care what he says. Really making his situation not carry much weight, and that the world is not really paying attention to what you're saying. And really, it's tone deaf. It's completely tone deaf to say October 7th happened. We're still in the midst of a war. The United States got involved with a war, having to help Israel and go into Iran because of not just the different proxies that Iran is funding, including Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis that are firing on American assets and of course, on Israel. Israel fighting a multi-faceted war here. And then are we gifting the Palestinians a state in the midst of all of this terrorism? Who would lead that state? Who are we giving this gift to? Have the Palestinian people shown any sort of legitimate and peace-wanting or democratic-leaning government, any government that doesn't indoctrinate their children with wanting to become shaheed and to become martyrs and to kill innocent Jewish or American or Western people? We haven't seen that. So completely tone deaf. And now the United States, as we know, look, Donald Trump in his first administration, let's even go before that, when he was thinking about running for office, he always said, we are being taken advantage of at the UN. The UN is a useless and really it's a shame. He always said that they're using that kind of New York City property to do nothing. And this is really an example of that. So Donald Trump says, we're going to skip this altogether. We're not going to come there to hear your garbage about whatever it is that you think you can do unilaterally. But it's a shame, because if we could have global support on one idea alone, that is to move away from and eradicate radical terrorism, then the world would be a much better place. We wouldn't be really sidestepping with all these different narratives to give this one a state and give that one this and give this one that. Say no to terrorism first, eradicate it, and then yes, we do want to see a better future for the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Well, speaking of United Nations and Palestinians, so the UN is warning of widespread malnutrition and starvation in Gaza. Very sad. The Israeli Defense Forces, though, or IDF, as we know, said that it was resuming immediate airdrops of aid to Gaza on Saturday night. But Lisa, they are also disputing the claims that they are deliberately starving the Gazans.
Right. Right. You know who's not starving in Gaza? The Hamas leaders. They're nice and fat and rich and well fed. And a lot of other Palestinians as well. But there are, of course, there's tragedy, there's death, there's starvation, there's hunger in Gaza. But we have to understand whose fault that is and get to the root of the problem. When you see these aid trucks rolling in, and when you see Hamas hoarding that and shooting deliberately at those who are trying to get aid off of the truck, people who are trying to feed their starving families, that's when you understand what is going on here. Of course, the mainstream media and the NGOs are completely misunderstanding that, because it's always much easier to blame Israel. In what war have we seen where the enemy state, you attack a state on October 7th, Hamas attacked Israel, and now the enemy state is in charge of feeding you and in making sure that you get everything that you need, and actually they're doing it. And then the terrorists are not allowing the people to get the food because they'd rather hoard it and not allow the Palestinian people to get their basic needs. This is exactly how they stay in power. This is exactly how they dwarf their population and keep them in check. And then the narrative is completely shifted. Look, there have been so many episodes of this false narrative that has been portrayed in the media. It is completely dangerous. It is completely false. Really get to the root of the situation and understand what is going on here. The Palestinian people deserve better leadership. They deserve the aid that's coming in. The IDF should not be the one fighting Hamas to let the Palestinian people get the aid that's coming to them. And
Yeah.
the UN, by the way, I just want to add this one point. The UN has done a horrific job at getting the aid in. They have actually done nothing for the Palestinian people. They have sided with Hamas. They have been part of October 7th attacks, and they really should have no say in all of this. I'm glad that we have sidestepped the UN in getting the Gaza Health Ministry directly the aid that they need, and of course, Israel making sure and hopefully doing their best to make sure that these people are fed.
Yeah. And Lisa, Hamas has rejected criticism from top U.S. officials after ceasefire talks with Israel broke down earlier last week, and the United States had cut short the discussions and brought its negotiating team home from Qatar to discuss next steps after Hamas's latest response shows this lack of desire to reach a truce. So according to President Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, Lisa, so what next steps could we see from both sides here?
How difficult it is to negotiate with terrorists. That's why we don't do that. I actually wrote an op-ed 3 days after the Trump administration took office, not to have direct talks with Hamas. This is what happened. We hit a dead end, right? Obviously. 6 months into this, the priority here to get the hostages home, we have seen no movement on that as of late. Of course, because Hamas needs to hold leverage, and they hold leverage by holding those hostages that are innocent civilians. At the same time, the Trump administration wanted to put every tool on the table in terms of hopefully resolving the situation, diplomacy being first. And of course, they've hit a dead end. But I want to remind everyone, this war could have ended on October 8th if Hamas wanted to. They could have given the hostages back. They could have put down their weapons, but they chose not to. And here they're choosing again to walk away from the table. Now, of course, Donald Trump and his envoy, Steve Witkoff, throw their hands in the air because there is nothing more to do except for show force. That is the language that terrorists understand. They have to allow Israel to finish the job, finish off Hamas, the way that they really decimated and diminished Hezbollah, the way that they're doing with the Houthis, the way that they're doing with Hamas. That is the only language that these terrorists understand, very unfortunately. But at least the Trump administration gave this a shot. They gave diplomacy a chance. But we understand that this is not the way to communicate with terrorists.
All right. Speaking of diplomacy or lack thereof, maybe Syria expected to hold a parliamentary election this September. So what's interesting about this election is that it will be the first election since the current government was overthrown last year. And we've also learned a revised electoral law has been submitted, increasing the number of parliamentary seats from 150 to 210, I believe it is. So what does this mean for the people of Syria, Lisa?
Let's see if this is actual diplomacy and not just lip service to the West, which it appears to be. Because look, this government came in, former Al Qaeda, former ISIS, former terrorists, I use the word former because I want to believe that that's what they are. But they prove to be actual terrorists when they are brutally and systematically killing Druze and ministers. I mean, it is horrific, the imagery that is coming out of Syria, and you hear nothing from the international community. The same people who are out on the streets advocating for Hamas and Hezbollah. So it's been a very difficult pill to swallow to say that the West wants to give this government, al-Shara, the president, a chance. He hasn't really proven himself to be any different from the terrorist that we believed him to be, and now holding elections. Let's see if they are not crafted in a way that benefits only this government, that they actually allow for democracy, that they actually count the votes, that they actually allow candidates that are from opposing parties to join the government. And we'll see how much they actually do walk away from terrorism and allow the people to have a chance at freedom and prosperity in the region.
Lisa Daftari, editor-in-chief of the Foreign Desk. So thanks so much for meeting with us today. Appreciate having you on as always.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Nice talking with you.